Hello. Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this talk. I'm going to do my best to stay within my allotted 20 minutes as well. Let me ask, how many of you in this room work for large companies? Okay. How many of you work for startups or entrepreneurial firms? How many of you have gone back and forth or intend to? I want to see some hands there, because I think that's the future, is this collection of corporates and startups actually creating new businesses together. That's what I want to talk to you about. This image here of a young girl getting basically a fire hose in her face is really, I think, a good image of what's happening in the innovation world today. And I would also say it's a little bit about what I'm going to do for 20 minutes is I'm going to throw a lot at you. So my hope is just to give you some new ways of thinking, and if you can walk out of this with one or two challenges to your existing beliefs or opportunities to do things different, then I've succeeded. Let me start with talking about how the game has changed. In the old game of innovation, if you did nothing, you stayed the same, right? If you innovated, created new products and services, you grew the business. But that's changed. That game is dead. And I'll bring this to life with a quick example. Now, in my own background, I've been an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, and I was a corporate executive before that. My last corporate role was as a vice president of a company called Sunbeam, a consumer products company that was going through a turnaround. And I remember the meeting when the new CEO came in after they had just fired a gentleman by the name of Chainsaw Al Dunlap. That kind of says it all, doesn't it? So he destroyed the company. We were going to turn it around. And the new CEO walked into the room with a McDonald's Happy Meal and a hand mixer and said, "Which do you think is more expensive?" Any guesses? The Happy Meal was more expensive. You could buy a hand mixer in China for $2. So think to what was happening to this industry, that we were getting chased to the bottom by retailers asking for cheaper and cheaper products coming out of China. And at the same time, our higher-end businesses, like your health businesses, were getting attacked from the early predecessors to Fitbit. So that's when I knew the old game was dead. Now, I'll come back a little bit later to how that story ended, and it was a happy ending, although it gave me my gray hair. But I use that as an example to talk about how the game has changed. In the new game, if you do nothing, you're out of business. If you do what you used to call innovation, new features, new products, extensions of what you're doing today, then you stay where you are. You generally can't grow the business substantially if you're doing the kind of innovating you were 10 years ago. What it takes to really grow the business today are new sources of growth. And that kind of innovation has been around forever. The difference is that now that's a more central part of our innovation strategies. As the levels of competition have increased, as there is more and more disruption around us, that as corporate innovators, we've got to find ways to actually recreate ourselves again and again, and that's not easy. An example that I think we can all relate to is think about Nike, how they went from being a shoe company to an apparel company to really a fitness and lifestyle company. And I think it brings to life the concept of continuing to reinvent yourself and not to stay focused on just what today's core is. And just a few more numbers to help bring this to life for you. 61 years is the average tenure of companies on the S&P 500 back in, when was it, 1958. It's now 18. And actually, that was 2011, so that's old information. And if you do the math, that means that 75% of the companies on today's S&P 500 will be gone from that list by the year 2027. Now, I've worked for big companies like GE and Ford and other institutions that you always think of being permanent, that you're always going to be around. But that's not true anymore. And it really brings up this word disruption. It means many things to different people, doesn't it? I think if you're one of the startups in the room, it's probably a great thing. It's what we want to do to the big guys. If we're a large corporate executive, it's what we're afraid of. Let's not get disrupted. We have to defend against disruption. So it depends on your perspective a bit, doesn't it? But I think there's some misnomers in terms of what disruption really is. There's a classic definition of it you kind of never saw it coming, right? That this image, and I'm sorry, this is right after lunch. Let me go to a cleaner version of that. This is a cleaner version of roadkill. But the idea that you're just getting run over is the traditional kind of view of what disruption is. I don't think that's really what happens with disruption. I think it's really more of we know it's coming, but we still don't do anything about it. We just let it happen. And it doesn't mean that we're stupid or complacent. It just simply means that there are factors in play here that keep us from doing what we really think is important to do. Let me give you a few examples more recently of companies that are struggling with this. Now, I love Porsche, and I think it's a great company. But there's a quote from the CEO not too long ago that said, "An iPhone belongs in your pocket, not on the road." Now, I know where he's coming from, that they're a driver's car. But there's something dangerous in a statement like that that's defining your business around what you make today. And when we look at what's happening with connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, who could have predicted this 5 years ago? And who knows where it's going to go in the future? But the game's going to change again. And it isn't just about the vehicles. I'm an advisor to a company called Revolve. Revolve is one of many players out there that are getting into the car subscription business. So now, instead of buying a Porsche, I can buy a subscription to 8 vehicles, and the Porsche is one of that portfolio. I'll never have to go into a dealership again. I'll never have to maintain the car. I get seamless concierge service to get my dream garage today. So what will that do to the Porsches of the world? That's why, as large companies, we have to be looking at where are things going, but how can we get into that game a bit? Now, I don't know whether this, the text coming up, I won't read these to you, but these are out of a study that said, why is it that companies see this coming and don't act? And you can probably identify with some of those factors up there around, we're getting measured on what's happening today. It's hard to get the investment to focus on things that are risky and disrupt today's business. I think a number of speakers addressed that. But it's coming again, and we've got to find a way through that. So I think what's next is the Internet of Things. It's impacting us in ways today that we still can't even fathom 5 and 10 years out. But there's good news and there's hope. I'm fortunate to do a lot of work with Cisco, and I think Cisco is a great example of a large company that continues to reinvent themselves. Examples of that would be John Chambers, who just retired. Chuck Robbins is the new CEO. But John Chambers said this idea that you have to see around corners and anticipate and actually disrupt yourself. And he's not just saying it, they've done it. If you look at Cisco's competitors today and compare them to their competitors 10 years ago, it's a completely different set of players. And that, by definition, says to me, they have gotten into new businesses and exited the old businesses. So ask yourselves, are your competitors today the same ones they were 10 years ago? And are they going to be the same ones 5 years from now? Because I think it's an indicator of, are you really willing to challenge yourself? Now, a lot of large companies that I work with, great ones, I've been on the corporate side, I've been an entrepreneur, and I've been a consultant to them. I'll tell you, I'm a lifelong innovator, but when I became a GM of a business, I had to put on the mindset of focusing what I'm measured on. And it was really hard for me, as a lifelong innovator, to run a business and still keep a focus on innovation. Because it's more about the systems and the culture and the mindsets of the organization than it is about changing individual people. But what people tend to do is, and organizations do, is they do things that feel good. Steve Blank calls that innovation theater. These are some examples that I borrowed from CB Insights of the things you can do if you want to play innovation theater. If you want to feel good about what you're doing with breakthrough innovation, then set up a startup office, hire Sherpas, do all these things that help you feel good about being disruptive. But if that's all you do, then you're not being truly innovative. And so how do we get past that into reinventing ourselves for the future? It really is a paradox. This idea that we have to optimize and extend today's core business, and we have to disrupt ourselves for tomorrow. And as a number of people said, it's really, really hard to do that. But it's something we have to learn how to do, because I think innovation is filled with these paradoxes. And I will tell you that there is good science behind the fact that if you can learn to not see this as an either or, to understand that these are two sides of a coin, a yin and a yang, that they're actually an interdependent system, that you can actually do more than you ever thought possible. And there's science that says that at an organizational level and at an individual level, those who can grasp paradox, separate the concepts, and find new ways to reframe and do more with it are actually more successful in the market. Take Singapore Airlines. It is both a low-cost leader and a high-quality provider. Now, in my MBA courses, they would say that was impossible. But they found ways by managing paradox to do just that. So this paradox is everywhere. And that's stuck on There we go. What we have to do is we have to figure out how do we do these things together. And this imagery, to me, is what it's all about, because I felt this, where you're getting tugged in two different directions. Do you defend today's business or focus on tomorrow's? Are you disciplined or are you going to be entrepreneurial? Are you going to innovate on the inside or are you going to innovate externally? What we have to do is we have to get beyond either or. So that really is around reframing and saying that we have to look at this as more of an interdependent system, that corporations can't do this alone. As much as I love setting up entrepreneurship programs in large companies, if your only focus is to do it yourself, then you're going to fail. Or to just buy it, you're going to fail. And same with startups. If you think you're just going to do it yourself and then find a quick exit, your chances are much lower. So there are such opportunities to leverage the best of both worlds, to leverage the best of startups and corporations, to not just build something independently and then license or buy it, but to co-create it from the beginning. And it's not easy, but I'm going to give you some examples of companies that are actually doing this today. One is Johnson & Johnson, a big behemoth of a company, in the medical products and pharmaceutical business, so highly regulated, but at the same time, they're finding ways to do this. And what they're doing is co-locating with entrepreneurs, proven scientists, and giving them J&J business and technical expertise to help them start new businesses up. And actually, in many cases, not even taking equity, because they believe that if they can get into the deal flow, that the opportunities will come. So it's a very visionary, forward-thinking approach that J&J is saying, we've got to get into this flow and co-create these things with these partners. Cisco is doing something similar, but very different. To go after the Internet of Things, they're partnering with other corporations that are peers and doing 90-day pilots with them, and then leveraging the startup ecosystem to take things to market very quickly. The image here is something called their Warp Drive. When they do these sessions, that's got basically a Lego system for IoT. They can put together something within hours that simulates what an IoT system would do to immediately put it in front of customers. So it's this notion of how can we go faster by partnering with the best of corporates and the best of startups. Sometimes it's about partnering on the outside. Sometimes it's about bringing those entrepreneurs to the inside. Jarden actually brought in, they're the people that make the crock pot, a kitchen appliance. They wanted to get into the food business. Now, you can argue whether that was a good idea, but to do that, they actually partnered with a food entrepreneur, embedded him into the business, and let him start the business on their behalf, independent of them. Coca-Cola has something called the Founders Program, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. But this program partnered with entrepreneurs to create new businesses from the ground up. This particular one here called Wonolo was an app and a whole basic workforce that was on demand to help keep their products in stock at retail shelves. Coca-Cola gave the idea to entrepreneurs, gave the equity to the entrepreneurs, and benefited from it as a customer. Now, I say I'm going to come back to that because the pendulum keeps swinging. The reality is that Coca-Cola was very successful with that program, but just announced a few months ago that they're shutting it down. Jarden's program that was very successful has shut down. What happens is, in fact, even Google is debating whether the X Labs is really a smart thing for them. This pressure will always be there for corporates to swing back to the focus on the core. What we need to do is find ways to sustain the effort. One of the ways that's happening today is to say, not that this is the answer, but an emerging approach is, let's move a little more of this to the outside, and let's do more disruption on demand. Cisco actually does this by seeding individual entrepreneurs, giving them an idea, and investing in them. In this case, they invested in those 3 entrepreneurs with $70 million and bought the company back for almost $700 million just a few years later. But that became a $3 billion business for them. So it's that concept of a spin out and a spin in as a way to create that right degree of separation and integration to create a future business. Now, Ann Hoffender, who's joining me here, if you want to raise your hand, Ann, is here from a company called Creative Doc. And we're partnering with Creative Doc because I think they're a great model of where things are going with disruption on demand. Their model is basically to work with corporates and say, let's disrupt you. You pay us to do it on a cost-plus basis. We'll only get a reward if it's successful in the market. One great example of that is a business called Zonky, which is a startup that they created with Home Credit in the Czech Republic to create peer-to-peer lending for a financial institution, but totally separate from the core business. The reality is that by doing it separate this way, they've captured 1% of the market within 1 or 2 years, I believe. They've created a peer-to-peer lending platform that's powered by the crowd and very much about human touch. And one of the great things is it has one of the lowest default rates in the industry because of the fact that in this peer-to-peer lending, the people in this platform see it as a community. If somebody loses a job and they're going to go default on their loan, in this model, one of the people who's a lender will actually help them find a new job. So what bank would have thought of that on their own? This idea of doing it on the outside is a powerful way to go. Create Tel Aviv is a nonprofit you have right here in Tel Aviv that's doing something a little different but similar to that. So this is a trend that's coming. We're partnered with Creative Doc in a US version of that called Next Big. But the idea of doing startups on demand and helping corporates to kind of reverse engineer things are where it's going. To win in this model, you need leadership commitment. You have to balance autonomy and integration. You have to reframe failure. Really, accept the fact that you have to be able to experiment, and then ultimately, find a way to do this. It's not easy. The last point I want to make to you, I'm going to skip this one, is that corporates and startups are great in their own right. But if we can find new ways to work together, if we can find new ways to take the best of both, and I've seen it, I've experienced this, that it really is the possibility to do more than we ever thought possible. With that, there's my contact information. This is my first trip to Tel Aviv. I love it already. I'm so overdue for being here. I look forward to speaking to as many of you as I can. I do have actually a couple of copies of my book with me for those of you who are avid readers and are interested. I've got a few to give away, and I look forward to meeting you, and thank you for giving me your time.